assessments, and then also the questions you have. And that's going to go on the blue paper. And what we know, what you're writing on those papers really is helping us to make sure that we are addressing your needs. That's the reason for it.
What do you know?
We know the first time we get tested, I was third grade, third graders. Well aware of that. They're not an interesting test to look at basics about behaving for 15 seconds in third grade, you know, to over the fact that everyone's okay. I guess you mentioned that I could have that. And I know that Davis hired a contracted
The kids have said now when you start a class, you get tested at the beginning, and then you start getting, you get a assessment.
I think that's different. Is it a completely different test? Those are the ones to evaluate how the child or how the teacher is. There's math and yeah.
The kids do have, I don't know if they get the end of the resource, but they're only middle high school.
This is the question.
Part of it.
So these are the tests for the students. I'm wondering if it's private editing. Seriously.
I don't maybe only go to the state schools, but actually they go to the end of the day schools.
I'm wondering how much private information is collected. Right now, third parties, how far does the information go?
That's actually what I think. I don't not raised it. Do we see the results? The parents get to see the results and when?
That's
what I heard.
That would be my question. Is the evaluation that justification? Why? We can't see the because of the regions. Right, but there's books full of SAT questions, studies. Said something else about I mean, the Regents Exams, we see the questions in this. I don't score my own.
Teachers score these?
Well, like for the state exams, you might do regional scoring. You never,
Time check with about 20 seconds left. If you want to wrap up your thoughts and your comments.
Right, yeah, that's what I mean. The teacher completes the classroom or so that teacher about legal grades and the next test.
We do want to give each age thoughts on the dynamics and analysis they would like. So we're going to start over at this table where your results set is. Does that group have something they want to share about what we know? You can pass, please.
Are they developing appropriate?
The comment, I'll just repeat it so everyone can hear that the Regents are the only state assessments required for college.
Too many.
Too many of them, too many assessments. Okay, this table?
Sure, they probably was one that stuck out the most. The professionals question the validity.
Professionals question the validity of assessments. Okay, this table.
Yeah, are they reliable?
Are the assessments reliable? Okay. So way in the back.
Anyone here?
Right, she was the last one to speak.
Oh, what did I say?
Let's say direction. The last one is
Are they developmentally appropriate?
Are they developmentally appropriate? Okay. Next table.
I guess, what is the point of the kids taking these tests when the feedback comes to us after they're out of the grade?
Okay. What is the point of the test when the feedback comes
How
so
does,
much later?
how can we use this information as
Okay,
parents
how
and as
can we use
teachers?
it? This table? Are we teaching to the test? Okay, and the last table? Are you passing? Okay, all right.
We're kind of two groups here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We forgot to hand our.
Okay, we'll gather them, we can gather them, okay. All right, so we're gonna do, again, we'll give some information and then we'll come back to the questions. So
Actually, the assessments have been around for many years. The New York State testing program, which which is now known as the 3 through 8, originally started in 1999 with grades 4 and grades 8, ELA and math. So you just had the gap between 4th grade and 8th grade. And even in 1999, it was quite a delay to get that information back to districts knowing what the score was. The actual 5th grade writing test began in 1983, and maybe there's some parents that went through the system that was still part of the New York State testing program. So there's always been assessments. We had the 4th grade assessment actually was first administered in 1989, and we still give that 4th grade assessment information. And the 8th grade science test began in 2001, and we're still giving that assessment. With the change in the Common Core standards, we had, first of all, the 3 through 8 was first administered in 2006, and then it became the Common Core in 2013. So this year will be the 3rd year of the Common Core 3 through 8 assessment. Actually, the Common Core was first adopted by the Board of Regents in January of 2011, and most districts knew and started to move in the direction of planning their curriculum prior to that, because districts were alerted 2 years prior to that they were negotiating the fact that we were moving towards the Common Core. And one thing that, as a district, when you get students that move from state to state, having the Common Core, I mean, you don't have to have different standards. Hopefully they're pretty aligned because there are 46 states that adopted it. Actually, Regents began, and they've been around for more than 150 years. And, somebody brought up the fact that Regents are required for college. Actually, the state of New York is the only state that has the Regents, and, I don't know if colleges really weight that or not, but there are kids getting enrolled from other states that don't have the Regents exam. So, it's just something that New York State and the Board of Regents, they don't want to give it up. So I think this was a portion. Pardon?
It is what it is.
Well,
You're talking
little about the state assessments, but I am going to fix my answer that I don't know where the research comes from. We all have packs of information when this began about where the research does come from. I just don't remember who and what. We'll get that to you. State assessments, we are using them to evaluate and develop programs. What do we need to do differently when we do look at data? What do we need to continue doing, and at what level of intensity? Even though, it would be optimum to get those results before the end of the year. And they're coming a little earlier, but they're not coming in June. But they're still taken into consideration in individual progress monitoring. And when we do that, the other things that are taken into consideration are all the informal and formal assessments that go on in the classroom, including input from the teacher. So it is helpful when we have our benchmark meetings 3 times a year, looking at each and every child. That's one piece of the data. What did they get on the state assessment? How did they do in the NWEAs? How are they doing on the assessments in the classroom? And all of that, we talk about and discuss and try to get the best instructional situation for every child.
Ms. Gorman talked a little bit about how the district will look at state assessments and just transitioning through when students get into 8th grade and above, because some of our 8th grade students are taking Regents examinations. Regents examinations, as I heard mentioned a little while ago, they're really exit outcome exams. In New York State, currently, all of our students, before they can graduate from high school, must pass 5 required Regents examinations. And then after that, there's different types of diplomas that a student can attain, depending on, they can get advanced designation Regents if they take 8 different Regents examinations. So there's different levels of what their diploma can be. But the bottom line for a high school student right now is to graduate, they are required to fulfill 5 different Regents exams.
The next is our third-party assessment, and we utilize the NWEA, or Northwest Evaluation Association. Those are used for a number of different reasons. They are used as a benchmarking tool. They are state and nationally referenced tests. They're also a little different from some of the other assessments that students take. They are online assessment, and once students reach their really kind of hit a wall as far as their ability in a given content area, then the test will drop back, give them an easier question, and really dial in on the discrete knowledges and skills that they have and that they don't have. There's also a component from the NWEA that's called the continuum of learning, and that, if you think of that in really as a metaphor, it's really like going to a doctor and being checked out and then having an assessment. What is the deficiencies? What are the proficiencies? And the continuum of learning becomes a prescription. This is what the student should work on to progress in the various areas that they're talking about. It's our hope that we will progress in our capacity to use the NWEA and or other assessments such that that prescription becomes something that we can share with you and is readily understandable and by all of us, such that when you're helping your students at home in any of these given areas, we're working on the same things and towards the same goal. Next, we're going to talk about our informal assessments.
So informal assessments, teachers, well, they're probably our favorite assessments because we do them all day, every day. They can be classroom observations, assessments that we give in class based on material we've just presented at the, even from the beginning of class to the end. We sometimes call it an exit ticket. Tests that go along with the program that we use, either a Pearson program or something else. Benchmark assessments also that we give 3 times a year. What good teachers do, we assess all day long. We look at our audience, we see who can answer the question, who can't answer the question, or who can explain how they got their answer, why their answer is correct, who can justify their answer. We planned this night based on, with a little bit of wiggle room to see, and we would have informally assess you, see what your needs were, and kind of modify our evening based on it. So we give informal assessments to monitor student progress, inform our instruction, and make changes every day.
Another type of assessment that we administer, we call them the benchmark assessments. And those are really just that. Benchmark assessments are benchmarks or yardsticks by which we measure students' progress throughout the year. We give those benchmark assessments 3 times a year and pull together all of the assessments that are given, the state assessments, the informal assessments that Kristen mentioned, the program assessments that go along with our curriculum. And those benchmark assessments help us to identify students very quickly who may be at risk of having learning difficulties, or identifying students who need some enrichment activities. The benchmark assessments really help us to take a quick and closer look at our students. The next, I'm going to go right on into multiple measures. A part of the benchmark assessments is the fact that we use many tools to assess our students. No single measure is ever used to make a decision for a student. The benchmark assessments, again, provide us a quick snapshot of the student's progress, as do the other assessments, but it's just one measure. It's just one piece of all of the factors that we use to measure a student's progress, one tool that we use. They let us know if students are on the right path or if we need to make adjustments for their learning. All of the information comes together to help us to really answer the most important question, which is how students are functioning in their classroom on a day-to-day basis. So we pull all of this together when we review our benchmark assessment data.
In Cooperstown, our formal assessments, we talked a little bit about it, are the state assessments, the 3 through 8 assessments. These are program evaluation, and state education department uses it as a means to measure district accountability. Somebody emailed me earlier on specifically where does this information go, and I'm going to try to share how the data that goes through the system is simple and easy as possible. Each individual student data, first name, last name, and a student ID is generated in our district. And our district sends it up to our regional information center, where that unique student ID number is connected to that student, along with all of the accountability measures that a district is held accountable for. We're held accountable for success on each and every exam in terms of male, female, the race that's connected to the child, if a student qualifies for special education services, as well as if it's a yes or no, if the student comes from a family that's economically disadvantaged. So there is a calculation developed from state ed, and you have to have at least 30 students in each of the subgroups. And that's how a school is either, they make their annual performance achievement or they don't. And that's the mandate for every district in state ed. This is also connected with the regents in terms of graduation. Each district has, I would say anywhere from 10 to 15 accountability measures that are monitored on an annual basis. And if you don't make that 2 years in a row for any particular subgroup, then you have to put together plans for state ed of what you're going to do to correct the achievement. Because the goal is to have all students performed at a proficient level or a level identified by proficiency from state ed.
Continuing a little bit with a formal exam such as Regents Exam. Regents examinations are given 3 times a year, January, June, and August. And a student only needs to pass that examination 1 time, so they wouldn't be taking it 3 times in a year. A successful score on these determined, as I mentioned before, the type of degree that a child would receive. In regards to SATs or ACTs, this is an exam that many colleges do require. It is more of a global exam that many the more selective institutions would require.
Actually, SAT and ACT exams are probably more connected in terms of college. The more competitive colleges, that's their means of measuring whether they're going to accept the students or not. So really, I don't think a lot of it is connected to the Regents. In fact, nothing is in terms of the colleges. It really is for graduation purposes only. Our AP exams, again, that is generated from the College Board. Those assessments are sent out and scored by people who have been approved to score those AP exams.
And back to the third-party assessments, those are again similar to the SATs and the ACTs in that they're global assessments. The NWEA, for example, gives us information about a student's progress across the board and compares students with national norms. So again, it's a global assessment.
And I already spoke to most of the informal assessments, but really when we, as teachers, use informal assessments, it's to make instructional changes right then or the next day. So, for example, if you give a quiz or a test and you score them and you see that everyone missed question number 5, or 80% of the kids missed question number 5, you're going to make a point to either reteach that skill in a different on a different day in a different way, or go over that question and try to identify what part of the question caught kids up. Was it the wording of the question or the answer choices, or that they just didn't understand the skill?
Kristen,
Yes.
can you just clarify something for me? And I may have missed it. When you were talking about the benchmark assessments that are
Yes.
given 3 times a year,
Mm-hmm.
that's separate from the NWEA, correct?
Yes.
And what is often used for the benchmark assessments?
We use, there are, well, we have a DIBELS assessment for oral reading fluency, and we have placement tests for math and reading that come from our Pearson series. And you can either give, well, based on what's best for teachers and how we can help our students, you can either give, say, the 4th grade assessment at the end of 3rd grade to see how prepared they are for 4th grade, and then again in the fall and the winter to see how much they've progressed from the end of 3rd grade to the middle of 4th grade. And then generally the 4th grade teachers would then give the 5th grade readiness at the end of 4th grade, so that we kind of have an idea coming in the fall of who's ready, who's not, or who's not as ready. And we can also do an item analysis to see specifically what questions were missed and what answer choices they chose.
So that covers math and reading?
Yes.
And the NWEA also?
Yes.
3 times a year?
Yes.
Math and reading?
Yes.
Sure.
A lot of the questions, I think, at least I grouped 3 together that seem to be similar, and I think I've covered in what we talked about. We've answered most of them, so I'll just kind of skip over to the ones that haven't been answered. One question is, do parents get to see the results? Usually at your parent-teacher conferences, teachers are going over those results. From the state assessments, you get the parent report, and as was mentioned, it comes out much later. The NWEA also has a parent report that some grade levels are sharing at parent-teacher conferences. I think we've answered those. Do teachers get details of results, not just scores? Yes, they do from each of those assessments. And as Mr. Ager mentioned, the Learning Continuum provides that as well from the NWEA, their third-party assessments. Why should students do well on a test if it doesn't impact their grade? That's a great question. It kind of indirectly impacts their grades, but we're always talking about how to motivate students to try their best when they sometimes feel that the assessment doesn't have any direct meaning to them. And then I took this one personally because it was a question about how students with disabilities are taken into account. For the NWEA test, it's what we call an adaptive test, and it adjusts the ability level to the student's needs. So if a student is struggling and getting answers wrong, it's going to drop down to easier questions. If the student is doing well, it's going to move up to more difficult questions. So that the NWEA does account for that. The other benchmark assessments are all individually administered, so the person who, the screener, we call them the dream team, who is administering the assessment really has an opportunity to see how the student is responding and make adjustments and give the teachers feedback about what is working. And then is there accommodations for different learning styles? On informal assessments, yes. On standardized assessments, no. They have to be administered in the standard format, although test accommodations are available for students with disabilities according to their individualized education plan on the state tests.
Most of these were covered. If the assessments are created by a company other than Pearson or the curriculum change, no. If the state writes the assessments, will the number of administered standardized tests decrease? I can't. That would be great. Are results in early enough for teachers to use that year? The state assessments, no. The NWEAs, they're in the next day, and for sure by the end, do it on a Monday, by the end of the week. So they come right like that.
Okay, what does it mean to teach the test? That's a good question. I think, and this is a personal opinion, that doing drill skill work all day, every day, and only focusing or spending a majority of your time focusing on the format of the test and preparing kids. Well, you're going to see this on the test, or you're going to see this on the state test, or that is what I personally think it means to teach to the test. My philosophy is that if you're teaching the skills and the standards all year long, you're preparing the kids all year long. So there's not a need to cram right before. Are field questions included, or will field tests be given in the district? I know that last year there were embedded field questions, and I believe this year there are embedded field questions 3 through 8. ELA and math? Yes. And additionally, I think at least 2 field tests are being given in District 3. Thank you. How can they drive instruction if results are delayed and questions are not shared? That's a very good question. That, I think, is probably one of the major complaints that we all have, is that we don't get to see the test. We don't get to see necessarily what answer choices the kids chose, to see where we can pinpoint what happened, why it went wrong. Why they went wrong, excuse me. Are they valid and reliable? That's a $1 million question, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Are they research-based? We can look into that for you. Are New York State public school teachers involved in writing? They are not involved in writing the 3 through 8 assessments, but they are involved in writing the Regents assessments. And there's a question, stress on children. That's also a very good question. From personal experience, I haven't seen children on the day of the test or prior to the test breaking down, crying, sick to their stomach, anything like that, just from my own view. However, what you see at home may be very different from what we see here. So please, if you are seeing symptoms of anxiety or kids talking about it, becoming anxious, please let your children's teachers know.